Michael Costanza. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here for the School of Architecture. So I'll be the one that's helping you with your admissions process throughout this time. We have here the directors of the real estate program. And so I'm going to pass it off to John, and he's going to introduce the session for us.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, my name is John Huppy. I'm the Associate Director of Real Estate here at Tulane. And I'm joined by Cassius Peeler, our fearless leader. Both of us have been here for 8+ years with the program. One of my big roles is also just my perspective of having actually graduated from this program myself in 2014. And since then, I've been involved with the program and also doing private real estate development work around the Southeast as well. I do want to point out before I pass it off to Cassius that we will have a question and answer period at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box and we'll be sure to address those at the end. But no further ado, I'll pass it off to Cassius, who will introduce himself and go through some of the highlight points of the program.
Great. Thanks, John, and thank you all for signing in. This is, as you know, being recorded. So, in addition to a live session, we will have this as a resource for other folks throughout the admissions season this year. My name is Cassius. I'm an attorney, a real estate attorney, but have an undergraduate degree and professional degree in architecture and from Tulane. But my work has been as an attorney was mostly in public and affordable housing, large scale redevelopments that included a kind of complex financing and public sector goals, and I think that's visible in some of the focus of our entire program. So I'm a professor of practice, but I have a professional practice prior to being a full-time faculty, and we'll talk about the faculty some more in a minute. But most of you, if you've gotten this far, have already seen the website. You know a little bit about the program, but essentially it's an 11-month program that allows you to start and finish in a year if you go full-time. We start at the end of May, basically June 1, and then students graduate the following May. It's a very interdisciplinary program, so our faculty are interdisciplinary, the coursework is interdisciplinary, and our students are typically, and it's practice oriented as well. So we have a practice-oriented faculty. We have a number of opportunities for you to engage with real estate practitioners, and the goal is both sort of understanding what the real estate industry is and then having an impact over time. So what the way we talk about it is that we help to do really three things for you. So one is preparing you with the core skills that you need to be successful in the short term, but also helping provide a perspective on the industry and real estate in general that will allow you to be transformative over time. And then the third thing is really building a professional network that helps you accelerate across that gap between that kind of early career success and really having a larger impact in your community. And that happens in part through our faculty. So I mentioned our adjunct faculty. It's most of the faculty in the graduate program are full-time practitioners who are teaching kind of one class for us, bringing in their professional expertise, some of their contacts, things that they're dealing with day to day, even during the course of the class. They're bringing that into the classroom, and that's been invaluable in starting our program. We also have a series of full-time faculty, of course. So we have 4 full-time faculty. Dr. Adu and Dr. Park are our newest faculty, but they all help to really bring that perspective that can be transformative. So Dr. Adu is really bringing in a career and understanding of historic preservation, real estate development, and kind of culture and how those things interact. Dr. Park has done a lot of research on housing and transportation, the connection between transportation and access to the city, and how that kind of larger typically public sector, resource helps to influence and support development. Dr. Keenan is focused on on climate, the intersection of climate change and real estate. So he's really an international leader, and is talking a lot about like the recent hurricane in Florida. He's done a lot of research specifically in Florida, South Florida. Used to teach at the University of Miami, and so thinking of how those kind of events impact real estate, not in the short term, and not just in the short term, but over time. And then Daniela Rivero, Professor Rivero, she's been a local practitioner here for a long time, so her PhD is fairly recent. She's still submitting some final paperwork for it, but she's got a kind of a deep expertise in what we've done here in New Orleans, and what we can learn from that, because our experiences here are not singular. So the faculty are really a crucial part of the program, obviously, and the scale of the program is such that it allows you as a student to get direct access to all these people, even when they're not necessarily in teaching that semester. The adjunct faculty are engaged, many of them throughout the year. The other thing we do, I talked about the partnerships and the network, really, and that happens through these partnerships with firms, with practitioners, and there's an internship, a fall internship that we set up. It's not required; it's not part of the requirement to finish the program. But about 2/3 of our students take advantage of those internships, and you can see some of the names of mostly local nonprofits, public agencies, and private developers here in the city that have hosted our students in the past. Some every year have space for one, but that's an opportunity in the fall to build your connection to practice. And then in the spring, that capstone research project, we think of those projects as kind of like each student is a mini consultant doing a research project for a client out in practice. And those clients are, many of them are local, but many are national and global, and at times. And both of these opportunities for the kind of the internships and the research are ways that you can customize your experience in what is a relatively short program, but it also builds those connections that allow you to really take the next step, because the goal is not necessarily just to get a piece of paper from Tulane University, but to start a career, and these relationships can help you do that. Speaking of the actual curriculum, though, I said we start in the summer with an intensive series of 4 classes. Those happen over the course of 8 weeks, and then at the end of the summer we take a trip. This is included in the tuition, but it's a week-long field study. Typically we go to DC and Philadelphia, or at least in recent years we've been to New York, we've been to San Francisco, San Jose, but that field study is a good kind of final part of a pretty intensive summer program where everybody gets on the same page about some basic skills, some language. There's a lot of just understanding the language of real estate and development and finance, and that happens in the summer. And then in the fall and spring, we have a more traditional sequence of courses, typically 4 classes a semester. You could take a 5th if you wanted to, but our students take 4 typically with an elective each semester, and you can see the classes here. We can talk more about those, but that's our kind of the core curriculum. We also do in the fall, we take another field study. It's basically going to the ULI Fall Conference. So the Urban Land Institute is a national, really international professional association of land use professionals, not all developers, but finance, land use, development, architects, contractors, building managers. They're all part of the ULI. And so we go to the major conference in the fall. Next week, we're going to go to Dallas with our students for that conference. So that's not, again, it's not part of the curriculum, but formally, but it is built into the tuition and the experience of the program. So our students come, I said it's an international or an interdisciplinary program. Our students come from a variety of backgrounds. I'd say about 40% of our students each year have a background in business, maybe 30% in design, planning, architecture, and 30% in something totally different. I've had students ask if they have to have prerequisites to come in. We don't have a kind of prerequisite, but we do, we do think that there's so many ways that your background, not just educational, but your experiences can have an impact on your thinking about real estate development and the impact that will have. So, somebody with a communications background might think, well, I don't really know anything about real estate, but in fact, there's a marketing and sales component. Essentially, that is, you've got a vision that something that doesn't exist, you've got to get other people to buy into that vision. So there's absolutely kind of communications aspect to thinking about development. We had a student who was a police officer. She said, well, I've been a police officer. That's not an obvious background, but she was committed to rebuilding parts of her community, and she had a pretty deep understanding of that based on her the time that she spent there in that role. And so even that kind of outside the box background, I think was relevant, and she brought some unique perspective into the classroom. So that's important for this from all of the students, and that class, curating that class is an important piece of what we do to support the educational mission. About half of our students come to New Orleans for the program, and about half are already in the region, let's say. So that's been a pretty consistent mix. We have a handful of international students. I think this year we have 4, which is a lot for us, but we've had a number of international students. Our program isn't heavily focused on international students, but Tulane University is. New Orleans is an international city, so it's I think there's a lot to what you learn here, but we can talk about international student issues in particular if people have questions about that. But it's a diverse student body, and the average age for our program is 28. And I think that masks a pretty wide range, just saying there's an average, but most students have, let's say, 3 to 5 years of some kind of life or work experience. Often it's direct in real estate, but sometimes it's very different. So I think that kind of background and that life experience is really important for the program. The places that people go, though, once they finish are important too. And I think there's a much wider range of jobs that people get than what people think about when they come in the program. A plurality of our alumni are project managers or financial analysts, which is kind of a similar type of job in kind of 2 different roles, or 2 different types of organizations. But that's what most people do. Sometimes they're in nonprofit, high-performing nonprofits, as well as for-profits. Sometimes there's large nonprofits and small for-profits. So I think that that kind of mix is it may be surprising. I mean, some people think, well, I don't want to work at a nonprofit, but there's I think such a range of reasons that people structure their organizations for real estate development that surprise students. But about 40% of our students do a kind of project manager, financial analyst role, and about 20% of our students historically have done some of their own development, either kind of full-time, or they're doing smaller scale projects on the side. That's I think an important component of what the program is designed to support and what a lot of our students want to do. Not everybody can do that right away, certainly. Sometimes it takes a couple of years to build the confidence and the capacity to get someone else to lend you money, basically, to do that kind of work. But that's important. I think John mentioned, John Huppy at the beginning mentioned that he's an alum. He does some of his own development in addition to his work with the program today. So that's important. About 40% of our alumni work in some kind of public or nonprofit role, and I think that's a surprising. I was surprised to see that statistic last year when I first looked at it, but it aligns, I think, with the kinds of reasons that people pursue this degree, that they want to have an impact that's larger than just the kind of the development site that they own, that really has an impact on the larger community. We think about the impact to the environment, and I think people are, as I said, surprised with the range of types of jobs where their skills can be impactful. So I don't know if you can see all these titles here, but some people, work for the public utilities. You wouldn't think that Entergy or the Sewage and Water Board would be a place to have development expertise, but in fact, they're interfacing with developers all the time. They own a bunch of property, and somebody's got to manage that and think about that. Those are big companies, and they have real estate needs. we have two alumni who work for investment funds that are attached to a university. So Rice and MIT each have investment funds for their endowments, but a portion of those are in real estate, and so somebody has to manage that fund. And in a sense, it's a very typical investment fund, but it's a kind of different entity than people are thinking about, and that's the range of options is only gets broader as you get into the program. So speaking of that, the kind of scale a lot of our students, a lot of our alumni anyway, work at, these are some example projects too that are here in New Orleans, and then a kind of waterfront redevelopment in Tampa that Olin works at. But they're usually complex financing. There's public interface with public sector agencies that are owners with public entities that are providing financing, tax exempt bond financing, tax credits. You can see here that kind of complex financing for a project that looks pretty straightforward is a big part of what we focus on, that I think is distinct from a lot of other real estate programs. But like I said, there's a lot of different things you can do. So we have alums who work in land conservancy organizations. There's the Booz Allen Hamilton is just a kind of brand consultant that one of our alums works for, and she is a leader there because the brand has to also do with the space that you have if you're a corporate kind of a corporate headquarters or something. So so that's a different setting. And then we have some alums who've gone off and started used kind of tech startup. So Backflip is you can check that out. That's one of our recent alums is looking at how to help just regular people invest in housing locally. I mentioned that a lot of our alums do some of their own work. So these are some local examples. Actually, the bottom right is one of John Huppy's projects. You can't quite tell. It's a blended photograph of, on the left-hand side is what it looked like originally, and the right-hand side is what it looked like after the renovation. But you can see just some of those projects. Here's another example that it's a couple months ago now, but one of our alums took these two buildings in the Lower Garden District in New Orleans and really transformed them when they were pretty derelict. And so it's been a key piece of historic preservation and cultural preservation, but it's also a way that he's paying his own bills and making investments and building wealth over time. So I think that's an important part of what many of our students are looking to do. And New Orleans is a great place to study real estate, in part because of the scale. I think there are certainly many larger cities in the US and the world, and there's a lot happening, and there's an excitement, but it's a place where you would have a very hard time having an impact or doing some of your own development, getting site control of some project where you could do something yourself. And so I think New Orleans is a great place to see the scale of impact, even if you end up going to a larger city. This is a good place to kind of start. Speaking of the investment over time, this is the tuition and fees for the current year. It's been pretty consistent. The summer semester is a little bit less, but and includes that trip to DC I mentioned, and then the fall and spring semester standard Tulane tuition rates. We have some grants available. It's not a separate application. You get considered for those as part of your normal application process, but that's possible. There's a Boudreaux scholarship, which is something you have to kind of raise your hand for, but it's a recent scholarship the school has developed to help add opportunities for people who might diversify both our school, but ultimately the field of real estate development. And I mentioned the internships in the fall; those are paid. It's kind of like a work study program. A lot of people ask if we have work study or TA options, and that's really how we do it, through these internships. So rather than paying you to shelve books in the library, we pay you to go out and work in the industry and bring those experiences back to the classroom. And then most of our students are taking out some kind of federal loans, typically something that they might qualify for, at least as U.S. citizens. So the tuition is important. Well, I have a chance to answer more questions about that. The requirements for the actual application, pretty straightforward: application form, a transcript, the resume. All those are things you probably have or have already submitted elsewhere. But the personal statement is, I think, something that we look at the most closely. That's really helps us understand what you want to do, why you think that Tulane is a good place for you to do it, and why now. I always encourage students to think about that as a you're writing something, but you're really trying to convince yourself that this is what you want to do, and that will be convincing to us. Sometimes people think that the personal statement is a chance to kind of give us back their resume in a narrative form, all the things that you've done. We have that. What we really want to know is, what do you want to do out in the world after this time here? And then the 2 letters of recommendation are pretty straightforward too, but we also have an option to we call it a mentor interview. Not everybody has someone that they think is a good recommendation for real estate. Some people who may know somebody, if you work for a real estate company right now, you may not want to ask your supervisor to write you a letter of recommendation to go to school full time. So the interview part is a way that you can find someone else. Maybe it's someone you know, maybe it's someone you don't know. You've just read about their work in the paper or something, and you can reach out to them. You'd be surprised how people will respond when you say, hey, I think you're doing amazing work and I'd like to learn about it as I structure the rest of my career. So it's a chance for you to learn something. We learn a lot about the kinds of questions you ask and the people that you're seeking out. So it's still helpful to us, but it's also a chance for you to learn something in the application process. And might as well start now. So for international students, the TOEFL is required, and we have an opportunity to do an online interview. I think I've already done that with some folks who are here, but we can talk more about those requirements in the Q&A if people have questions. And then key dates are important, obviously. We actually have an early application deadline, which isn't here, but December 1st is a time where we're going to take all the applications we've received by December 1st and try to provide an admissions decision to those applicants by, let's say, mid-December or something, in time for you to start to think about all the things that you might need to do. This is especially helpful, I think, for international students, where you may have more kind of visa application and other things to go through to get ready to move to New Orleans, because the program again starts at the end of May, as you can see here. So the normal application deadline, January 15th, is obviously important, and then we'll get admissions decisions out for those folks. We have an open house in the fall, that's in the spring, sorry, that's in person. I think Michael will correct me, I think it's March 23rd, but you'll
March 24th.
March 24th, but you'll get more information about that. And then April 15th, we want to hear from you what you think you'll do, so that we can see you back here in New Orleans by the end of May. So that's the kind of quick overview. A lot of that's on our website, so some of it might be old news, but hopefully that was good enough. And we'll see if you have any questions or comments for us right now, right, Michael?
Yeah, so thank you all for coming. Now we're going to open the floor for questions. I would say the best way to do that is through the Q&A function on the webinar. And I'll hand it over to John Huppy to lead this session.
Great, thanks, Mike. Yeah, Cassius, just a quick question off the top. Some of our students are engaged in dual degree work. I was hoping you could take a second to talk about that.
Yeah, I didn't do that. I'm going to quit screen sharing if that's all right. You got Michael's information. We have a couple dual degree programs. I think there's 4 architecture dual degree architects right now. We have had a dual degree in preservation, and we've had a couple in the business school. We have an MBA MSRD program with the business school. So those are pretty good. The summer start for us actually helps make those dual degree programs work pretty well, because you get time to really focus. Sometimes you don't. You get 2 or 3 classes, you're kind of going part-time everywhere, but I think the dual program works out pretty well because of the summer structure to our classes. And you can do that in architecture, preservation, and business. We also have Master of Public Administration dual program. That's the MPA is online at Tulane, so it's a little bit more complex. But if you're interested in that, you can reach out to Michael and me.
Great. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the research that students do in the spring. It's a pretty impressive list of organizations that students partner with. I was just curious, are they expected to come in with research questions, or is that something that's kind of developed and guided throughout their time in the program?
Yeah, I think the capstone research class is it's partly designed because you're only in the program for a year. And so as a real like thesis, you in theory would be figuring that out basically your second semester in the fall. So the idea of having a partnership with someone out in practice is that you can help take an idea or something where you might be interested in historic preservation. But that's not a research question, right? So you can maybe sit down with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and talk to one of their finance people. They have a community investment trust. We had, a student as an example, like, okay, well, what are you interested in? What are things that are really over the horizon a bit for you? Obviously, if you have a job to do something, you don't need a student to kind of look at that over the course of a semester. But there are a lot of questions that people have about, some new public policy that's coming up, some new financing program, maybe something that they're already doing, but how do I do it in a different market, or something they've seen someone else do, heard a lot about it, but don't know how it would apply to them. So one thing that is good, I think, about these research projects is that you have to understand the client, you have to understand the partner, learn about their business, what their goals are, and then often it gives you a chance to apply something that you might even know you want to research, or you might not have known even existed, but you get to a little bit deeper level of detail, I think, because of that partnership. It also enables you to build relationships, often in a place where you might want to work. So if you want to move to Chicago after this program, we can find a partner in Chicago, and you start through that last semester, you start to work on topics that are of current interest to people in Chicago, but you also are interviewing, talking to people who are in Chicago. So when you ultimately go and do some interviews in Chicago, I mean, one thing you can do is say to your partner, hey, I'm going to Chicago. Is there anybody I can talk with? But the other thing you can do is talk about how, well, I did this project with, and I interviewed the head of the city planning department, and, and this is what they said, 3 months ago about something that, might not be what you're interviewing for. You're typically not interviewing at your actual partner, but it allows you to be to actually be, but also to be seen as being knowledgeable about the local industry, because real estate is a very local project, local industry. Each locality is different, and like I said, those relationships matter. You want to have relationships outside of your little city, but you've also got to have some relationships where you are, and this helps you do that.
Great. And I have one last question on my end about facilities, because Tulane has a kind of a historic campus in the uptown neighborhood of New Orleans, but Tulane's also investing heavily as a developer in the downtown market. So I was hoping you could talk more about where classrooms are held, why, and just more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there were a couple people from New Orleans who signed up, but most people on the virtual webinars are not here. So you probably wouldn't know that Tulane is looking to make really a generational investment in a downtown campus. That's right now it's mostly the medical center, but it's something that we've already moved the graduate classes for real estate and architecture and preservation to a downtown location, which, it's nice to be on the uptown campus. It's certainly nice to be on the kind of historic campus for Tulane, but there's something about learning about the built environment in a more urban setting that's important. And then, like, a lot of our alumni are are working. So, you know, to the extent they're working downtown, that's convenient. There's a lot of projects that you can go see. And again, I think it's part of really a rebirth. And that's not even the right word, a reinvestment in downtown New Orleans that's going to be much longer than the course of, you know, an 11-month program. But our classes are in a downtown location, and I think it's important for people to know that it's in a space that the business school has used for the last few years, so we've kind of taken it over, and it's really beautiful. All the technology, all the things you would get on campus uptown are available there, but you're in the middle of everything that's happening downtown. Can walk to City Hall, you know, all that. It's better public transit there, honestly, than there is here uptown, and that's a good question, John.
Great. Some of the questions from the chat box. What's the common class size?
Yeah, so the classes in our program are, you know, 18 to 20 people is kind of ideal in our view. That's been pretty consistent. I think this year we have 14. We had more during COVID, ironically, but we have that's around 15 to 20 people is pretty typical for our class. And I think that's a good number. We don't want that to get any larger, really. The adjunct faculty I think are really good at handling that kind of class size. It allows you to, as a student, you know, get some diversity of other people and engagement, but it's not so big that you can't sit in the back of class and just sort of take notes and look at your phone and then move on. You've got to be engaged, and I think that's important. So yeah, the class size are pretty consistent, and you do have an opportunity. I didn't talk about the electives. We have a number of electives, and that's what most of our students pursue, but there is the opportunity for you to take really any graduate elective at Tulane, any graduate course at Tulane University that you can get into. You can take, and you make a case for why it advances your interests, and we've been pretty open to allowing that. So we've had, you know, we had a woman last year who was a CPA. She had a deep accounting background. You know, she wanted to take and could get into some classes in the business school that were different. We've had people want to take a class on large scale energy financing, and the business school has a program about solar financing, and they're thinking of it from a business standpoint. They weren't thinking of it as a real estate project, but really, if you're going to have a solar farm, you got to have land. So I think there are some opportunities to take courses throughout the rest of the campus and access everything that Tulane has to offer, even kind of within this short program.
And there's a question about kind of focuses in the classroom, and I think a lot of these electives hit on that, but the one in particular was, is there a focus on affordable and historic tax credits, and how salient is that throughout the program?
So there's a focus on tax credit and mixed finance, complex financing, and in the U.S., much of that is tax credit. That's the kind of structure that we use. So there is a focus on that. We have a community development finance elective course that specifically digs into that a little bit more. That's taught in the spring. So if if that's something you want to really do, that's a great elective course. It's taught by Matt Paranod, who was it was a C-level position, so chief innovation officer, something like that, up at a high performing nonprofit in Boston, and just retired to New Orleans. So he's a great resource, and he's got just an enormous network of people and projects to bring into that class. But it's, he's done a lot of focus on affordable housing and having housing availability to low income people, or a range of incomes. It's got to be safe, decent, and affordable, and tax credits are one major way that we build new affordable housing in the U.S. But also energy sustainability, energy efficiency tax credits, historic tax credits. I think there are the new markets tax credit is a kind of broader credit, but opportunity zones. I mean, all of that, all those are sources of funds that can help you either do a project or do a project at scale, while also achieving some public sector goals. And that's so those are really important sources of financing for a lot of our students, and that where they're going, whether they're working for themselves or not. But it's that the it's we do have that specific focus. It's not the only thing we talk about, obviously.
And can you speak more to the statistic that about 20% of our graduates are engaged in some of their own projects within about 3 years of graduating?
Well, maybe you can speak to it. Or you've been doing it.
Yeah, I mean, my response is just that I think the class is very entrepreneurial. I think there's a very high entrepreneurial spirit within the graduates, and so there's a natural inclination to have vision and to want to be on the ownership side of projects, whether it be, you know, flipping a house or buying a small rental property, all the way up to we've had graduates who are engaged in multi-million-dollar projects and are at the ownership level. So I think there's a lot of that going throughout our program.
Yeah, and I think access to capital is a real question. So obviously, if you've got that, then kudos, and you can have an opportunity to do something right away. I think John was scrappy and made it work, and New Orleans allows that. But we've had other people who've worked for somewhere for a couple of years, gotten some more experience and confidence, but also credibility, so they could go and say, hey, I want you to invest in this because I've demonstrated that I can do this. And so maybe it's 5 or 7 years later that they end up either doing a project on the side or quitting their day job and getting into something that's really a larger scale thing than they could do otherwise.
Yeah, and this is a good follow-up question here, because this question asks, are students actually engaged as developers during the program? And in short, yes, we've had students, some of my own partners even, after the program, who were my classmates, had done projects ahead of the program to a certain scale, and were even engaged in projects during the program. I remember some students even excusing themselves from class to go answer a phone call from their banker or a contractor. So we've had some of that happen before, but I think, why are they in the program if they're doing development? Usually they're pretty, recognizing that they want to scale up and they need to understand the more complex natures of real estate. They may not understand fully about tax credits or how to access some of these more challenging financing sources, or they just need a deeper understanding of all the different facets of real estate. And so this program helps them to kind of unlock those additional knowledge sets, so that they become a more well-rounded developer and able to scale up as they kind of envision their career headed.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of the people who've done that have, who's their attorney? Kelly Longwell, who used to teach the legal issues classes, their attorney, so you could start to ask, you get advice from people who wouldn't even answer your phone call otherwise. And I think the scaling up is big. If you bought a house, maybe you moved into another house, now you rent that one, suddenly you own 2 or 3 single family homes, you want to do more. It's not clear how to do that necessarily. And so I think the scale is what most of the people who have some development experience are looking for when they come to the program.
And then the last question here is more about the summer schedule. I think the word intensive it can be a little scary at first to start off a grad program with an intensive. So can you speak a little bit more about the summer schedule and kind of why is it organized as an intensive, what that actually looks like, and
Sure.
how that feeds into the fall semester?
Yeah, I think so. We've always called it intensive. Post COVID, we had the whole different structure. And one of the things that we changed was taking it from what was really was it a 4-week or a 6-week program to an 8-week program. And I think that's a much more humane way to do it anyway. So I still say intensive, but it's less intense than it used to be. But it is meant to be, you're going to class and you go to class the next day and you go to class the day after that. So you don't get a chance to go to class, set some stuff aside. Maybe, this weekend I'll do this thing and then I'll go to class again. You really are walking into the classroom, and you gotta be, while you're thinking about it, you gotta be preparing for the next day's class. And so that's sort of what we mean by intensive. But I think that's really helpful, especially early on, when you can easily sort of forget what you learned a week ago. Well, now it's not as long ago. And I think the other thing about the summer is that it's 4 different classes, and broadly speaking, 2 of them are building sustainability, kind of city urbanism planning courses, and policy, and then 2 are kind of finance courses. And so I think a lot of times people come in with some expertise in one of those, and so they might feel like, okay, well, I get today's lesson, I already kind of know that. Good to hear it again, good to participate in a discussion, but what I got to figure out is what I'm doing in the finance class after this, because that's the part that's new to me, and somebody else might feel the other way around. So I think it's a way for the class itself to blend, for some of the topics that cross disciplines, for you to see that too. So you hear about something in the finance class, and then you go into this urbanism class, and somebody's talking about how that will affect some city planning decision. And I think that those kinds of crossovers are really part of what we start to see and it only happens by doing it intensely in the summer. And then you get out early. So part of the whole goal of the program too, we could absolutely teach more stuff if we had another year, but most people are eager to get out and stop paying tuition, get out in the world and have some impact. And so we think we've made the program as tight as we can, but that kind of a summer start is important. And again, a lot of people get through it who have never, who don't have a core background in this, who don't feel like this is a next phase, even though they're sitting next to somebody who's already done some development, and that's okay.
Yeah, you described me when I was entering the program. I'd never taken a business class before because that was not my background. So I was very nervous and anxious about the finance work, especially because that was the newest and the scariest topics for me to start getting into. And this actually leads into the next question, which is that, obviously the whole point of the summer is to start at a very slow pace, get everyone on the same page, including finance and stuff like that. But the question here is there any work that can happen ahead of this program, in particular with Excel work or finance? And the short answer is really yes. We actually put out a kind of an acceptance package. So once your acceptance goes through, we have an acceptance, or sometimes we call it like a welcome package, that includes a lot of resources and textbooks or books that you can start to dive into if you have time before the program. And then the other thing that we actually have students do is kind of a pre-program Excel course that is actually applicable to real estate, but really the whole point is to help you open that application up, spend some time. If you need to take 25, 30 hours to go through that material, you can. If you're really, never touched Excel before, we also have students who are, a little more adept with it and able to fly through that material faster. But that's one thing that we've gotten from feedback from students in prior years. And I think, Cassius, this is probably year 5 or 6 that we've had a pre-program Excel kind of introductory course to get students warmed up to that before classes actually start.
Yeah, and then you have access to those kind of materials throughout as well. So it can be a resource as you go forward.
Yeah, and both the finance courses, the one in the summer and also in the fall, I'm actually engaged in, and I help teach the fall class. We refer back to those materials from the summer, from that introductory course all the time, to make sure that we're not just, flying that into your face and forgetting about it, but actually reinforcing it and trying to get it to stick so that you're comfortable and actually become a little bit of an expert at finance by the time you leave this program.